Poland, situated right in the geographic heart of Europe, has changed its political borders several times over the course of its history. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country shares its borders with 7 other countries. Poland's surface area is half that of France. It has a 500-kilometer coastline on the Baltic Sea and is basically a flat country. 75% of the country is lower than 200 meters. In the south, the landscape becomes more mountainous. The Carpathian mountain range rises to an altitude of 2,500 meters in Poland. Poland has nearly 40 million inhabitants. It is the 6th most populous country in Europe and one of the rare countries of Central Europe that does not have a significant ethnic minority. 95% of the population is, in fact, of Polish origin. The country is making great strides in modernization, not only in the way its institutions function, but also in its infrastructure and facilities. For the mindset that for decades favored collective housing has now radically changed. The country's architectural heritage is now being carefully restored. Poland, rebuilding the ruins left by the Second World War, is accomplishing wonders in this domain. Entire cities have been reconstructed thanks to archive documents. And now their beauty shines forth as never before. The finest examples of Polish architecture have been restored, whatever their period. The Baroque curves were the forerunners of much more daring creations. Poland's history over the past 1,000 years has been quite turbulent. The kingdom was in conflict with the Teutonic Knights from the 14th century on, and several times the country was cut up by its neighbors. Poland even vanished from the maps during most of the 19th century. And yet it has survived, proud and united around its people, its culture, and its jealously preserved traditions. One of these age-old traditions is beer brewing.
Na zdrowie.
Poland is one of Europe's leading producers of pork. Pork has always been an important ingredient in the traditional cuisine, but Polish cooking has also been open to outside influences. Creativity and imagination have transported even the restaurants, like this one installed in a roadside aeroplane. As in all the northern countries, the traditions are strongly linked to the changing seasons. At the summer solstice, some girls sport a wreath of flowers. Folklore has always played an important part in Polish culture. This is true for the music of the great composer Frédéric Chopin, born in Poland of a French father. Arthur Rubinstein, one of his fellow countrymen, was one of his most brilliant interpreters. The political upheavals that shook the country in the 20th century often coincided with major changes in the local art scene. It took nearly 500 years for a non-Italian pope to be elected. John Paul II was Polish. He was witness and actor during the revival of the Polish Catholic Church, which embraces 95% of the population. The Church is such an integral part of the society that only in the light of Catholicism is it possible to understand the customs and history of Poland. The Catholic Church is not, however, the only denomination in the country. There is also a percentage of Protestants and Orthodox. The Second World War and the occupation by Nazi Germany were deeply traumatic for Poland, with widespread destruction and massive deportations. The Polish Jews paid a heavy toll in lives. Before the war, they made up 10% of the country's population. They were exterminated in Auschwitz and the half-dozen other concentration camps set up on Polish soil by the Nazis. Even today, Their mere names evoke images of horror. The Communist Party took power after the war, but the economic fumbling and oppression led to riots that were brutally suppressed. In 1970, the militia quelled a wave of discontent that arose following a hike in the price of food. The union Solidarity, led by Lech Walesa and created in 1980, was at the vanguard of an even more militant movement. That's when Moscow, alarmed by the anti-Soviet demonstrations, ordered the Polish authorities to declare a state of siege. Solidarity was banned. However, in 1989, there were strikes once again, and with the backing of the Catholic Church, democracy emerged. The courageous little electrician became president and left the shipyards where it all began. Now, the former Communist Party headquarters is home to the stock exchange. Poland's long-drawn-out emancipation eventually led to the European Union, which it joined in 2004. Poland became one of the agricultural powerhouses of Europe. Agriculture makes up a significant part of the country's gross domestic product. This sector employs 1/5 of the workforce, despite the small size of the farms and the sometimes rudimentary means. Poland's agricultural production is both rich and varied. The vast forests of Poland have found new market outlets all over Europe. The success of prefabricated furniture and wooden houses have boosted the whole sector. Poland is by far the largest coal producer of the European Union. This indispensable fuel produces 95% of the country's electricity. Iron, zinc, and copper. The country has abundant mineral resources. The raw materials are used in processing industries such as the automobile and aeronautical industries. Poland has made a name for itself in the fields of aircraft and helicopter construction and motorization. As for the craftsmen, they apply their know-how to the traditions that are bursting with colors. Poland has to adapt to the European norms and so decrease the proportion of coal, a heavy pollutant, used to produce energy. Little by little, the principles of sustainable development are being put into practice here. Tourism is developing, largely thanks to the improvements in the road system. The local traditions and the picturesque landscapes are attracting a good number of visitors. The country has a vast potential for tourism. Its 20 national parks are havens of unspoiled nature. In the 16th century, Poland was one of the most powerful countries of Europe. Now, it's taking up an ambitious challenge on the paths of renewal. Warsaw has been the capital of Poland since the end of the 16th century. Its appearance has greatly changed since then. The communists laid out wide avenues, ideal for traffic, but rather impersonal. These thoroughfares are now evolving, and more modern architecture is gradually making its appearance. During the war, the city was almost completely destroyed by the Nazis. It has now risen from its ashes, and with the help of paintings and photos, they've done an impressive job of reconstructing certain sectors exactly as they were originally. A heritage saved from barbarous destruction and protected by the mermaid, the symbol of the city, and by UNESCO. Reconstructed with great care, the royal castle was the residence of the kings of Poland, then the seat of parliament. The interior has also been completely restored to how it was in the second half of the 18th century. Fortunately, many of the works of art had been taken to safety before the destruction carried out by the Germans, who, in effect, made a great effort to systematically destroy all the symbols of the Polish nation and culture. The younger generation are being taught to sharpen their concentration by listening to music. On the ramparts of the old city is the Barbican, a fortified bastion dating from the 16th century. The city, founded 2 centuries earlier, very soon became an object of envy. It rapidly became the seat of both temporal and spiritual power. The numerous churches built in a variety of styles show how important Warsaw was for the Catholic Church, as well as for other religious denominations. The civil architecture bears witness to the splendor and opulence of the reign of Poland's last king, Stanislas Poniatowski. Monuments and buildings several centuries old were destroyed in just a few days of fighting against the German occupying forces. Initiated by the Polish resistance movement, the uprising of the population in 1944 was marked by violent combats. A few buildings miraculously preserved still bear the scars. The Jewish ghetto uprising took place a year before. Despite the hardships the Jews were undergoing, a group of intrepid youth mobilized to stand up against the Germans. They found ways to communicate among themselves and acquired arms and ammunition. In April 1943, the uprising broke out. The odds were 100 to 1, but they held out for a month and inflicted severe losses on the enemy. The Wilanów Palace, which survived the war, is a shining jewel of Baroque architecture. Where the old structures couldn't be saved, modern-day architecture has taken over. Like here in the university library, with its surprising rooftop garden. From the quiet library to the bustling Śmielna Street is quite a change. This pedestrian street is one of the capital's busiest arteries. In the Praga district, your attention is caught by this curious band. They play requests, like a jukebox. You choose your tune by sending a text message. Night has fallen. As the streets empty, the jazz clubs fill up. In the northwest of the country lies a vast stretch of flat green land, Mazuri. Apart from the thousands of lakes, there's practically nothing to interrupt the plain. Many consider it the most beautiful part of Poland. It's surely one of the most rural. Three-quarters of Poland lies in the vast European plain that stretches from the southwest of France all the way to Russia. In Mazuri, we run into the ordinary barnyard animals that gaze at the passing trains, and other species that come and visit the region during the summer months, such as the stork. This migrating wader is a welcome guest. The inhabitants even provide special poles to encourage nesting. For Barbara Dochła-Wolska, the storks are almost part of the family.
The storks arrive very early in the springtime, the end of March, beginning of April. And that's how it is every year. There's never a year they don't come. The male arrives first and prepares the nest. A few days later, the female arrives.
In Mazuri, the white stork is part of the landscape. In the Middle Ages, a vast forest covered the region. It was home to the European bison, among other animals. The European bison, one of the largest land mammals on the continent, is a cousin of the American bison. They nearly vanished on account of deforestation. Here, the Borecka forest is a favorable habitat for the bison. Krzysztof Zoch is a park ranger here.
In Poland, there are about 1,000 bison, and here in the Borecka forest, 300, of which 80 roam freely. There are 3 in this pen. Up until the First World War, bison could be found living in several regions in Poland. During the war, there was a severe drop in the bison population, and then their numbers increased once the war ended.
The many lakes of Mazuri are the traces of glacial erosion. The migrating glacier carved out hollows that then filled up with water. The region counts 4,000 lakes. Some of them are linked by canals. On the Elblag Canal, the difference in water levels is too great for normal locks, so they came up with an original solution. Like a watermill, hydraulic wheels supply the energy needed to pull the boat out of the water and haul it up the slope. The boat is cradled on a wide carriage on rails. This ingenious system was invented in the early 19th century. Here, on land that was long fought over by Prussia and Poland, stands the Malbork castle, an impressive brick fortress built in the 13th century. It is the largest medieval construction of this type in all of Europe. The whole complex is in fact made up of 3 castles nested in one another. Malbork was used as headquarters for the famous Teutonic Knights when they returned from the Crusades in the Holy Land. In the 14th century, the fearsome soldier monks ruled over a large part of the north of present-day Poland. 1 century later, the Kingdom of Poland had to step in to put an end to the domination of the famous Maltese cross. Heading for the coast, the leafy trees give way to conifers, a sign that the soil is becoming more acid. And then suddenly there's sand. It almost completely covers these trees that it has killed. Huge shifting dunes up to 40 meters in height are found throughout the Slovinsky National Park. These dunes, pushed by the wind, can move up to 10 meters a year. The dunes shift so much that in the 16th century the neighboring town of Leba was engulfed by sand. The inhabitants had to move and build a new community that is now a small fishing town. On the coast of the Baltic Sea, Sopot is Poland's summer capital. This town, with its many cultural events, is a favorite vacation spot. These pompous buildings that have been dozing since they were built at the beginning of the 20th century must have been quite startled by the work of the architect Zaleski, who designed the Crooked House in 2003. It looks like it's straight, so to speak, out of a Walt Disney cartoon. It is Poland's most photographed house. The seaside resort of Sopot is quite close to the large port of Gdansk, Poland's main port and one of the most active on the Baltic Sea. The port of Gdansk has existed for over 1,000 years. Thanks to the port, the city has enjoyed complementary names down through the centuries. Gdansk has been called Poland's Golden Gate and even the Pearl of the Baltic. In the middle of the 14th century, Gdansk was a member of a commercial association, the Hanseatic League. It was first composed of German cities. Then it expanded to include Northern Europe and finally all of Europe. The member cities of the Hanseatic League enjoyed immense prosperity. Richly decorated gates announced the affluence of the town. The Hanseatic cities often adopted the same style of architecture. The influence of Flemish architecture is quite evident here in these townhouses with their ornate facades. The discovery of America modified the major trade routes and sounded the death knell of the Hanseatic League. The power and independence of the Hanseatic League eventually gave rise to a good deal of envy, even among the League's own trading ports. The League was disbanded in the 17th century, and as a result, Gdansk suffered economically. Amber was used as a currency for trading in Gdansk. And it was a very old currency, for the amber route from the Baltic to the Mediterranean dates back to remote ancient times. Amber is the fossilized resin of conifers. Amber is mysteriously washed up on the shores of the Baltic Sea, also known as the Amber Coast. The resin came from a vast forest of conifers that was covered by the sea. The crafting of amber, glass and silver is a tradition here in the cities on the Baltic. Lech Parzizek.
We finish up by polishing the stone, which gives it its final shape. The next step is placing it into the silver or gold setting, and depending on the shape we got after polishing, we decide whether we'll use it to make a pendant, a ring or a bracelet. This one here will be a pendant.
The ancient Greeks discovered that rubbing amber with cloth would charge it with static electricity. They called it electron, meaning made by the sun being the most powerful source of energy. Amber varies in color from yellow to brown. It's more or less translucent, depending on the amount of air trapped inside. Upriver from Warsaw, the Vistula and its tributaries cross the southern landscape. 1,000 kilometers long, the Vistula is the only completely Polish river. Kazimierz Dolny, a city on the Vistula, had its golden age thanks to the grain trade. The rich grain merchants built magnificent townhouses in the Renaissance style. Further east, we come to Lublin. The city was occupied by the Austrians at the end of the 18th century, then by the Russians in the early 19th century. The Lublin castle's facade has very oriental lines. Inside, the Jewish tower is a vestige of the original castle. The Holy Trinity Chapel is built right into the ramparts. And its Gothic vaults are decorated with Russo-Byzantine frescoes, which are very rare in Poland. They date back to the early 15th century and are proof of the city's multicultural character. Throughout its history, the city has suffered through many invasions and extensive damage. All that is in the past, and the city is now quite peaceful. Heading towards the border, we come into Zamosh. The city was founded at the end of the 16th century, following a simple grid-based layout. The main market square is the geometric center of the city, which remained the property of the founding family until 1944. "5 minutes to noon. In the tower of the town hall, a man dons a traditional cape. Noon. The man takes his trumpet and steps out onto the balcony. It's a tradition. Every day at the same time, the trumpet sounds. Further south, we're near Malbork, a mining region that's been active for centuries. This is the Wieliczka salt mine. "3,000 years BC, they were already gathering the surface salt here. But the first shafts were sunk by monks in the 13th century. 135 meters below the surface is a labyrinth of galleries spread over 350 kilometers. Salt used to be worth a lot more than it is today." Marek Sizewski.
The salt from the mine belonged to the king, and the salt extracted from the Wieliczki mine covered the needs of the entire country. You could even say that the economy was really based on salt. 1/3 of the king's revenues came from Wieliczki's salt. Salt was an extremely precious asset.
The mine has a specific microclimate that is especially beneficial in treating asthma and certain allergies. The galleries are dotted with salt sculptures done by the miners and a variety of artists. Their works represent the local legends, and in certain cases they can attain impressive proportions. Salt has infiltrated the supporting beams, so over time they've become petrified. A chapel as large as a warehouse contains some remarkable sculptures of notable personalities in Polish history, and different scenes from the Old and New Testaments carved in bas-relief. Sometimes concerts are given here, for the acoustics are excellent in this large chamber. As everywhere in Poland, Pope John Paul II has a prominent place. Lodz, southwest of Warsaw, is Poland's second largest city. At the end of the 18th century, it was annexed by Prussia and later by Russia. The Russians decided to make the city a textile center, and fortunes were made, as was the case for the Poznański family that lived in this monumental dwelling of the late 19th century. Israel Poznański was the owner of Lodz's largest cotton mill. His mansion, which gives a measure of his fortune but also of his aesthetic taste, contains works of Art Nouveau, very popular among the rich industrialists of the time. The Poznański factory was right next to his palace. The huge brick building has been fully restored. Marta Warzyniak.
The manufactura center here were factories built in the 19th century by the Jewish industrialist Israel Poznański. It housed the whole process for producing cotton cloth. And right next to the factory is his palace and the workers' housing. Poznański created a whole city within the city.
The Manufactura Center is now a post-industrial complex and is a good example of successful restoration. The buildings, which were not designated as a national landmark, might have been torn down. They were saved and restored to the norms of contemporary architecture and design. There's a museum dedicated to the history and production of textiles. In half a century, the industrial activity transformed the quiet little town of Lodz into a multinational metropolis. The Poznański factory covered several hundred hectares and was equipped with the most advanced machines and techniques of the time. Agnieszka Zgędziowska.
The royal government granted free use of the land to attract the textile industry to this region. Starting in 1823, skilled craftsmen were flooding into Lodz from Silesia, Czechia, and Germany. There were spinners, weavers, dyers.
Along with the techniques of production, the museum also exhibits the artistic aspect of the textile industry, embroidery and prints. Lodz was a textile center, but it was also chosen as home to a cinema school that now has a worldwide reputation. Andrzej Bednarek.
Most of the internationally known Polish filmmakers have studied at our school. There's Roman Polanski, Andrzej Wajda, Krzysztof Kieslowski, Jerzy Skolimowski, and Krzysztof Zanussi, and the top cameraman as well. They all studied here. Like in other European countries, the Polish film industry has the backing of different government institutions, such as the Polish Film Institute. In Poland, we produce several dozen feature films per year and a good number of documentaries.
The Cinema Museum is housed in the mansion of another textile industrialist. Among the different material and objects on exhibit, there's a curiosity, a 19th century bioscope. It renders relief and movement from photographs. The Lodz Art Center, which opened in 2005, is also housed in a building from the textile era. The center supports and organizes a good number of events and exhibits in a variety of artistic fields, from design and painting to photography. Lodz is experiencing an extremely creative period. Architecture is a prime example, but there are also the graphic and decorative arts. All over Poland, commercial centers are springing up. They use state-of-the-art materials and techniques to advance on the paths of renewal. Surprisingly, a design-style hotel manages to blend into the old Poznański textile factory. The structures of brick and metal make for a striking contrast with the elliptical openings and pastel colors. It's a very popular center for fashion designers to show off their latest collections. The paths of renewal sometimes take odd routes, like down the catwalk of a fashion show. An organizer, Jacek Klak.
Someone just had to go ahead and do it for the first time. And why Lodz? Because this city has a long tradition in the clothing industry. In the 19th century, this was the largest cloth weaving factory in this part of Eastern Europe. And in the 20th century, it became the largest clothes manufacturer in both Eastern and Western Europe. Now, Lodz is becoming an active center for fashion designers and creators. There are major schools here to train in these professions. And this is where the contests like the Golden Thread are held. They're meant to promote young creators.
Heading south, the landscape becomes more hilly. In the spring, the rivers are swollen with the melting snow. The first foothills of the Carpathian mountains rise in the distance. The Carpathians are the only alpine-type mountains in Central Europe. They resemble the Alps in climate, vegetation, altitude, and their sharp peaks. They're divided into smaller ranges, such as the Tatras, where the town of Zakopane is nestled near the Slovakian border. Its rustic charm has made it a favorite place for Polish intellectuals, writers, and musicians. They come for the climate and for the comfort of the wooden houses so typical of the region. Jan Karpiel is an architect.
Dom był budowany całkowicie z drewna. Kiedyś nawet nie posiadał.
This type of house is all made from wood.
Stał na dosłownie 4 kamieniach.
Before, they didn't even have cellars.
Czasami, jeżeli był to jakiś spadek terenu, to
The
murowano
house was simply laid on 4 stones.
mury na glinie, a potem jest to dom zrobiony jak
It's a house that's
mebel,
constructed
po
like a
prostu
piece
jak
of furniture.
skrzynia. To, co widzicie,
What you see here behind me is a construction made out of tree trunks, assembled so that they notch together at the corners.
na narożnikach, żeby tam zimne powietrze nie przechodziło. To, co widzicie pomiędzy belkami, to jest wełna drzewna, którą
And for
specjalnie
insulation, we fill the space between the logs with wool.
po wybudowaniu domu utykają, izolują, tą izolację robią, uszczelniają.
The Polish architect Witkiewicz developed the distinctive Zakopane-style house, a model in wood that is still very popular. Zakopane is a thriving town thanks largely to its winter sports. The funicular is an easy way to get to the ski slopes that go up to 2,000 meters in altitude. Summer bobsledding is also good for a thrill. In the Tatras range, the pasture land up between 800 and 1,500 meters is used mainly in the summer. Władysław Butz is a shepherd, and with his 2 dogs he's going out to see his flock. The sheep go up into the mountain in May and stay until September. With the sheep milk, the shepherds make a type of cheese that dates back to the Middle Ages.
We take the ewe's milk, a bit of baking powder, and we mix them together in a vat. And then it rises and rises, something like yeast. And that's how we make the cheese called oscypek.
As soon as they've finished milking, they start making the cheese. The milk mixture is allowed to ripen in a vat for 5 to 10 hours at room temperature. Then they do a warm ripening before adding the rennet, which curdles the milk. Then the cheese is hung so that the water and whey can drain out. Once it has rested and been hand-pressed, the cheese is molded, salted, then smoked. The traditional odzipek made from raw sheep milk has been designated regional product by the European community, so the odzipek is now a protected trade name. The stands in the market offer odzipek in a variety of forms, most often cylindrical or spindle-shaped. Zakopane possesses other resources as well, leather and pelts from a variety of livestock. The furs are quite welcome here in this region, where the average annual temperature is barely 4 degrees Celsius.
I sell leather products, sheep and goat skins, cow hides. Here's a skin from our region, from Zakopane.
The climate of the Tatras is also influenced by a very strong wind, the halni. It can blow at almost 300 kilometers an hour. Luckily, it's a warm wind. In winter, the halni is a curse for skiers. In summer, however, it's a blessing for drying hay and the washing on the line. There are also religious buildings of wood in the same style. In Debno, the little church consecrated to the Archangel St. Michael dates back to the 15th century. It was built with larch wood using dowels, not a single nail. Inside, the magnificent polychrome decoration has held up well over time. It boasts 33 different colors. Donations from parishioners have allowed the church to be kept up in impeccable condition. The church has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here on the shores of the man-made Lake Chochtin, 2 castles have been standing guard since the 14th century. They were built as border posts on the former border with the Kingdom of Hungary. Here on the shore of the Dunajec River, they rope long wooden skiffs together to form a solid but supple raft. The rafts are piloted by boatmen from the mountains, like Migdaj Stankstoff.
They've always floated timber down this river. Right up to the 60s and 70s, they were still floating timber down the river. But that's not directly connected with what we're doing here. The people that lived on the river have always had little skiffs. They used to be made from hollowed-out tree trunks. They were used to transport people and cargo. And then already at the beginning of the 19th century, they were using them for tourists.
Near the Slovakian border, the road runs through Chocholow, with its traditional wooden houses all built without a single nail. Here, woodworking is an art. Jan Zeder is a wood sculptor.
I get my inspiration from religious themes, and I specialize in nativity scenes. I just did a wood sculpture of Christ for the church in Zakopane. It was 1.8 meters tall. Here I'm doing a Last Supper inspired by Da Vinci's work, but I'm doing it in my own
As the country is so deeply Catholic, most of Jan's commissions, like his sources of inspiration, are religious. The paths of renewal also pass through Krakow, the former capital and one of the oldest cities in Poland. The marketplace is one of Europe's largest medieval squares. In the center is the cloth hall, the old covered market. It now houses a number of shops selling the country's traditional craftwork. Here you can find the entire range of traditional products and materials: pottery, embroidery, wood carvings, metal sculptures and jewelry, and of course, amber. The fine town houses with their different styles make for an elegant decor. The oldest part of the Church of Our Lady dates back to the 13th century. Today, they're getting ready for a ceremony in honor of the city's craftsmen. Inside the church, there's a surprising abundance of gilt, paintings and wood sculptures, some going back to the 15th century. The only thing that remains of the city's old fortifications is this imposing gate. Krakow is also home to one of Central Europe's oldest universities. The famous astronomer Nicholas Copernicus was a student here. Perched up on the Wawel Hill is the Royal Castle, the residence of Poland's monarchs for 5.5 centuries. Behind the ramparts is the Gothic Wawel Cathedral. It was here, on the banks of the Vistula, that the coronations and funerals of Poland's kings and queens took place. Krakow is very important for the Polish Catholic Church. It's the seat of an archdiocese. The Archbishop of Krakow, who may be a cardinal, has authority over a number of bishops. The future Pope John Paul II was named Archbishop of Krakow at the relatively young age of 44. 3 years later, he was made cardinal. During his papacy, he visited his homeland 8 times. Kazimierz was once an independent city. It was the Jewish district before it was absorbed by Krakow. During World War II, a German entrepreneur ran a factory producing enamel kitchenware here. His name was Oskar Schindler, and he saved over 1,000 Jews. Steven Spielberg made a film on him, which he shot here. In June, they celebrate the Wianki festival. Girls wear garlands of flowers that they cast into the Vistula to predict their future love life. The city considers itself Poland's cultural capital, and there's no problem holding a traditional festival to the beat of modern rhythms. In the Jewish district, the Soup Festival always draws a good crowd that comes to sample the alternative music and the żurek, a sour soup made from rye bread, vegetables, and hard-boiled eggs. This brass band is serving up a very different type of music, but with the same enthusiasm. Poland is forging forward on its often rocky road. Today, in the light of its past experience, Poland has all the resources necessary to continue on its paths of renewal.